In this deeply personal and powerful episode, I am joined by my 30-year-old son for an intergenerational conversation about the 3 V's of representation in K-12 education. Using real stories, we will reflect on what visibility, voice, and validation look like in his school experience and how it shaped his journey. This episode continues to focus on real talk, real solutions, and real impact, with a spotlight on how representation affects identity, belonging, and future possibilities.
Welcome to Real Talk with Dr. Ruthie Uncensored.
I am Dr. Ruthie Payno-Simmons.
We get honest about the real challenges and possibilities in education and beyond.
Welcome back to Keeping It Real with Dr. Ruthie Payno-Simmons Unfiltered. I'm your host, the Inclusive Disruptor, and today's episode is close to home. I am joined today by my son, DJ, who is here to reflect on his K-12 school experience through the lens of the 3 V's of representation. Again, visibility, voice, and validation. We are talking real experiences with nothing filtered and nothing watered down. So, welcome today. Would you like to say a little bit before we get going?
Honestly, just proud of you, what you're doing with your podcast, what you're doing in the education community. I've always told you, I think you would be a killer Secretary of Education at some point. But I'm happy to be here, happy to be a part of this. Glad you're doing your thing and, following your dreams and goals.
Well, I appreciate that. And I will say this, I appreciate you being here. And also, I have learned a lot from you over the years. And I think that as adults, there's a lot that we can learn from listening to not only our sons and our daughters and our children, but also to young people. There's a lot that we can learn. So I'm here to learn from you today. So let's just start with a couple of questions. Can you tell us a little bit about where you went to school and what your K-12 experience was like overall?
Well, if you didn't know, my mom was a teacher growing up. So when she got bumped around, that means we got bumped around with her. So I went to 3 different elementary schools. Let's see, first Post Oak. I was probably, kindergarten, first, second, then I think Forest View, third, fourth, fifth grade, Pleasant View, which was probably my favorite experience. Then we moved to Holt, 6, 7 through high school. Then I went to Michigan State University after that. So Post Oak was like an inner city school district, but it was like outer city, if that makes sense. So it wasn't like necessarily in the hood, but it wasn't really, but it was a part of a hood school district, for lack of a better term. She's probably gonna kill me for saying it like that, but that's what it was. Now, Forest View and Pleasant View were more like give me the better term to use.
This is unfiltered, so I feel like
I know, but I'm still trying to be better. I don't want to, what do you call it, deficit speaking and thinking?
Yeah. For you all that are listening, we talk a lot about making sure we're not talking about people and experiences from a deficit frame. And so DJ is just trying to be thoughtful about that. But I really am interested in hearing what you're thinking. I think what I'm hearing you saying, you can correct me if I'm off, is the discrepancies in terms of what you saw from school to school, from neighborhood to neighborhood. Neighborhoods that were more invested had schools that, like, you could tell the difference, that there was more resources for those schools. And so Forest View was a school that had amazing students in a school community, but didn't have the same level of investment in its neighborhood or in its school as, let's say, Post Oak. And Pleasant View was a magnet school. So even though it was still inner city, in the environment, the region that we live in, it's where students came from all around through schools of choice and from the neighborhood, but there was an application process for that particular school. So it had a different feel to it. Does that kind of connect with what you're thinking?
Yeah, for sure. So the first 3 schools, those are schools where I went to where people look like me, the teachers look like me. Some of the experiences were catered to people that look like me or experience what we experience as Black folk. And then you move the whole 6, 7 through high school, which is completely like different experience where you kind of feel like a fish out of water. You feel the stares a little bit stronger and longer, and you're a little bit confused by them as a child or as, an adolescent. And it kind of gives you a lot of confusing mixed emotions and understanding about your learning environment. That makes sense, at least for me at the time. Especially coming from Pleasant View. Pleasant View was my favorite experience because it's a magnet school. I'm a music guy, a creative, so it kind of allowed me to have that lane of expression while also in a learning environment. I felt like the teachers there were pretty good too. I liked my teachers when I was there. They seemed like they cared. They had a lot of like extracurricular after school programs. I know they weren't getting paid more for. They were just kind of doing it for the love of the game. But just to put into perspective, one of my teachers there had kids that went to Holt, which is the school I ended up moving to. So she didn't put her kids in that school, even though she was teaching there. So that kind of speaks a little bit to the difference in resources that were allocated to that school compared to those in a more affluent environment. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. I know we're being thoughtful about these labels. The goal is to have inclusive conversations, but tell our stories the way that we
Mm,
experience them. And I appreciate that. I can tell you, I remember when we went to Forest View, I remember when we were pulling up, because I always wanted to go see the school and acclimate you all to the school before it started, when I would get bumped, which is a whole nother conversation for another episode in terms of how new teachers get moved around so much because of the seniority system and what that might mean. When we were pulling up to the next school, I remembered, and you were very young. Again, you were going into third grade. You looked out of the window. Do you remember what you said when you first saw the school when we pulled up?
nah, I'm kind of nervous what you're about to say.
Then I
To
don't
be
want to say it if you don't want me to put it out there, but
right now.
you observed the noticeable difference between the curb appeal of Post Oak and Forest View in terms of investment. We're not talking negative about the schools themselves, but we're talking
Mm,
about how schools are supported and how, depending on what community you are in within the same school district, you can have a very different experience with regards to access to resources. I mean, in Lansing, I had to carry tables down the stairs from the school administration building to actually
mm,
put furniture in my classroom at Pleasant View because I didn't have furniture. There was a lot that I did to make that space more appealing and inviting for students. I was in a portable and I was like, there's no way if I feel the way I'm feeling walking into this portable, how are my students going to feel? So I painted the inside. I brought in furniture. I worked with colleges and banks to get used computers that they were throwing out so that I could have a computer lab within the classroom so we didn't have to wait to go and access computers, on a schedule. That we
mm.
can have them at our fingertips. But you said when we pulled up, Mom, why is this school broken? And again, you were 6, 7, 8, maybe, and you observed the noticeable difference between not only the curb appeal, but even the basketball courts on the playground because they didn't have nets,
Mm.
and so that's just telling, but let's go back to the questions. If you had to describe your school experiences in 3 words, what would they be and why?
I feel like I'm almost not even the best person to gauge because I would have been okay wherever I went because I had an educator at home.
Yeah.
So that's a tough question, and it was so different because of all the different places I went to school from where we started and ended up at. So I guess it might be better to pick an era, like before high school or after high
I
school.
like that. I like that. So
Mm.
before high school,
Yeah, it's just hard because, like, again, like three, four different schools, completely different environments. There's not like one way. Like each of them was like almost their own experience in a lot of ways. I would say my experience of hold at least was awkward. I'm gonna give you sentences. Words gonna make it hard. My experience as a whole was it was awkward because it was an interesting time because they had just become school of choice. So a lot of people I went to school with before, like when I was in Lansing, ended up coming there. So the black population like jumped. It skyrocketed around the same time I went there, but they didn't have the teachers, the infrastructure, the systems, the organizations in place to understand the best way to go about that because I'm sure before we got there it had to be like a less than 5% black population in that school, so they didn't know how to relate to us. Like, why are we dancing at lunch? Why are we rapping at lunch? Why are we like, they took us being loud. You could tell that they were a little bit more on guard, but it wasn't like we were being crazy or it's not like, it was dangerous. It's just, that's just how we have a good time. And it's an open environment. So, um, it's weird because again, like I got probably some of the better learning there. They had a lot of styles of teaching that were probably better suited for academics, but again, I would have been fine wherever I went. Chances are, just because of who I had at home, and I just kind of always have been a little bit of an academic. So
a
it was
little
just
bit.
it was awkward. I'll just say it was awkward. Yeah, I'll just say it was awkward because then too, like you're trying to Some people don't, some people do. I was one of the ones that was trying to find a good in between. Like, I come from, the family I come from, but I'm in an environment that doesn't look nothing like that with people that are really like that. So it's weird sometimes. There'll be little things too, like Will Omari, for example. Like he would walk around with a pick in his afro, what I mean, which is normal anywhere else, but they didn't want him to have it, even though some of the kids would wear like ball caps and stuff like that in the hallways, and but like a do rag, a pick is a problem. Like which I don't think they understand, but little things like that throw off your day, which eventually throws off your learning because it's not like a hospitable learning environment or like a healthy or an environment you want to be in. It's like you already know you're the other, but then that's like one of the times where you being the other is slapped in your face. And I think it might have affected Jaden and Omari a little bit more than me because I think I just did a little bit better adjusting. But even for me, it wasn't the easiest adjustment. Like I stopped playing football when I went to Holt, which was kind of out of protest a little bit at the time. But also, I just kind of knew that it was just different there, and not a different that I liked from what I did know. So I guess that's the best way to explain it, which I guess sounds kind of negative, but I'm trying to speak from a place of like covering people I know as well, not just what I experienced, because I think I got a little bit lucky compared to some other people. So,
Yeah.
um,
I appreciate that. And I want to
mm,
reiterate that a part of this podcast is about being uncensored because I think sometimes we're trying to be so correct politically. We definitely
mm,
don't want to be offensive, but sometimes in that we self-censor and we miss opportunities to learn. And so I don't take what you're saying as negative. I think you're sharing your experience and your perspective. And
mm.
there's a lot to learn from that. And I'm going to be curious to see what themes emerge across all the interviews, that I engage in. Because again, like you said, you're telling your story, but you're also thinking about people close to you or people that you know. Okay, you said you stopped playing football, but you played football throughout high school.
I ended up coming back around my junior year, so like my last 2 years, but in football all the way from
Yeah.
second grade to fifth grade, and then I stopped from sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, tenth, almost 5 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, I played basketball still though,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you did a lot of different things in high
yeah.
school. You definitely played sports, but you were in the band. What were some of the other activities that you engaged in?
It was kind of a lot of like little random stuff, I guess, because we lived around the corner from school, so we kind of just stay there and hang out, and I just kind of would end up in things like ping pong club. I don't even know anime club. I did that. I think I was the only black person in there, but it worked out because that's what I do now for a living. So,
Would you like
making
to,
anime
at this
content.
point, share a little bit about that, or do you want to do that towards the end?
Yeah, I'm an anime content creator. I make anime content on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and it's something I kind of stumbled into. I didn't plan on it. It just started as a hobby, and then I started growing a following, and then after a while, I found out ways you can make money off it. And I ended up actually making more money than the job I had, and I was working in marketing and PR at the time, which that probably helped me get good at making content too. So it all kind of worked out. But yeah, anime. I was in the anime club in Holt, and I don't think they would have had an anime club. Actually, I know for a fact they didn't have anime club at other schools we would have went to if we would have ended up at some of the other high schools. So
I appreciate you sharing that. I also know that you are part of the Links program.
yeah, that too. Where
Yeah.
you get paired with one of the students on the spectrum. So we would be paired with students, and we'd help them kind of get through their course. You just help them take notes, help them stay focused, because focus that was 90% of the job, just kind of keeping them on task. I actually like that. That's something I actually would probably want to do again at some point in some capacity. That was probably one of my favorite experiences I hold. I'll say that because you just kind of feel like you're helping out somebody. You kind of become their ally in school because school is a little bit rough. Kids are mean,
Hmm.
especially the kids that are different. So then you kind of have situations to where you end up in like a common environment and you see them getting picked on a little bit or mistreated or just treated differently. You can kind of have the opportunity to step in. And it makes me wonder like what it would be like for them if they didn't have like an advocate. That's what it is really. You're kind of building like an advocate network for students. And I think that was cool. I think more schools need to incorporate something like that. If they don't already, I'm not totally sure.
I think that the Links program at Hope Public Schools allowed for that partnership, that collaboration, What were some of the things that you learned from your relationships with students that you were connected to through the Links program?
A more creative way of seeing things in life. You know what I mean? They process things different, and different isn't wrong, but it's just a different perspective. And sometimes they're kind of unique and interesting to the point where like, Dad, I would have never thought about something like that, you know, and it kind of helps you out. I feel like more things like that are needed. I've run into a few of them once in a while, and I'm always kind of curious to see how they're doing
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And I'm not taking credit for anything that they have going on, but it feels good for them to remember, like, hey, you helped me get through this course, or like, you know, you were there for me. You know, say what's up in the hallway, you know, shake up in the hallway or dap up in the hallway and stuff like that. Kind of helped me,
Yeah.
you know, when I was, you know, dealing with things that other people might not understand. So it just kind of felt fulfilling, I guess, is the
Yeah.
best way to explain it.
I heard you say that your relationship with different students in that particular experience expanded your perspective, helped you to look
Mhm.
at things from a different approach. Let's get
Mhm.
into the visibility part of this particular conversation. Growing up, did you feel seen at school?
Through six, yeah. Six past that. Not necessarily. In order to be seen, you have to have things that are clearly geared towards your type of understanding, your experience, where you come from, your background. I mean, they try to do things like, I guess, raps or like some kind of add some kind of dance or sports something into whatever we were learning or how we were learning. There were some teachers that did, you could tell they tried. You know, it's not like I appreciate the try, you know, but like, at that school there was one black male teacher. I'm not even sure if there was any black women teachers when I was there.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think. I
I
don't think
should
there
know
was.
too because I eventually became an administrator in the district, right? So,
Yeah, so I mean,
yeah,
you're at a school with 30 something teachers and one of them is a black male. I mean, you might have had like an intern or something like that, but inherently they don't really know anything outside of what they see on TV or maybe from people they know. Most of them, I mean, sometimes you have the ones that grew up with us, you know, and they can kind of be allies sometimes, but even they're kind of rare to come
mhm,
across. And so I'll give them credit. They tried a lot of times, but I just don't think they had the know-how. They didn't have like the experience, and part of that is because there weren't any black people in this administration. So, well, the principal, he was my first 2 years, I think.
yeah,
He was, but I mean, that's just again two people in a school of 500 students and 30 faculty members. Like it's,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
And maybe even more than 30. I think there
yeah.
was a larger high school staff. Without mentioning the principal's name or the administrator's name, what was your report like? What was your experience like? Did you feel like that made a difference with regards to visibility?
Yeah, yeah. There are a lot of mixed feelings about him. I remember from other students and stuff like that because he was a little bit of an authoritarian. They thought he was coming down on them a lot harder than he was coming down on other kids. But it was definitely nice having a face and a voice that, like, you know, dap you up, talk to you like, you know, your family talks to you. Shows they cared. He was there in a few situations that if another teacher or administrator had been there, I'm not sure I would have gotten the same benefit of the doubt.
Hmm.
For again, like a better term, I don't know if y'all my phone's going off. Sorry about that.
It's,
So that's definitely appreciated because again, having somebody with a shared experience, he might see a kid like me and understand. Okay, he's a good kid, never really gets in too much trouble now. So when things come off or happen, it's not. You know, like sometimes, like people don't know. People don't know. They see a black kid with braids or dreads or something like that, dressing how he dressed, talking how he talks, and just assumes, okay, he's this, he's that, they said he did this, so that's what he did, or that's how it happened. Other people that shared our experience might ask questions. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
what made that happen? Why do you feel that way? Where did this start? Where did it come from? You know, like you don't get those questions asked from other people. So that stuff like that was nice because there were a few times where I had some hiccups in high school that I think somebody else were there in that situation and wouldn't have went as well. Or if again, I got lucky because I had you guys advocating for me too. So worst come to worst, you know, you guys come up to the school in a second, and I still have my grades to kind of cover me. So it's like you point at my grades, you point at the fact I don't get in too much trouble, then I'm okay. But other students whose parents aren't going to be as quick to come to the school, you know what I mean? Like they don't have that. So that's why I know for a fact I was a little bit more lucky in that situation.
Yeah. So again, that's a lesson for us to think about for those of you who are listening. How in what ways do administrators and educators serve as cultural brokers to students that share similar racial or other identities within the school system? And if that isn't the case, how do we prepare educators to be able to be multicultural in their understanding and in their position as they relate to students, to make sure that when things happen that they're looking at it not just through a lens that might be biased, but through the eyes of that student and their lived experiences. So, okay, I'm going to go to the next question around visibility. Were there moments when you felt invisible or erased? And if so, can you share one of those times?
I feel like I kind of already went over that a little bit. Just there wasn't anything geared towards our experience, like the Black experience, as far as education goes.
Yeah.
Even when they tried, just because it wasn't like authentic, it was what they think it is, or what it looks like on TV, or So I guess that would be most of it. Just weren't really too many experiences that were like geared towards Black people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying like actually nah, yeah, it's definitely needed. It was definitely needed.
Yeah, and I don't hear you saying negative things about teachers in general. I think I hear you, and I'm not. And if I'm off, you correct me because this is meant to be uncensored. It's meant to be authentic. But I don't hear you saying something negative about the teachers themselves or the educators themselves. I hear you talking more about maybe not understanding diverse experiences and not setting the systems up to center those experiences. Is that accurate or is that off? If it's off, let me know so we can make sure we're reflecting what you're really saying.
Yeah, no, I have most of my teachers. I think had their hearts in the right place. I don't think I really had too many. Now I know of some people that did, and some other teachers that weren't, but I didn't have those teachers, and it was more of an ignorance thing or just an uncultured thing, lack of representation. It wasn't like a malicious, sometimes internal bias maybe, but it wasn't like I didn't go to school thinking I was being targeted or I was there. But it would be kind of interesting because some of my like Spanish class and stuff, or their French classes and stuff, where things were extremely geared towards, of course, because those languages, but the cultures that are associated with it. So it's not like they couldn't do it because
Mhm.
those teachers weren't like Spanish or I think with the French teacher, he was French, but he was Creole, so he was black. So that was different. But like my Spanish teacher wasn't Spanish; she was a white woman, but everything was really ethnic, and a lot of it was kind of authentic too. So it's possible. It's just they don't. I don't think do the work to figure it out. Probably because they don't know that they need to.
Yeah. And I think that that has implications for teacher preparation, for, educator preparation programs
Mhm.
for administrators, teachers, and support staff. I know that as much as I love my students and really tried to get to know them and make sure that I was being responsive, I still had missteps. And
Mhm.
I still did things that reflected, my own bias and deficit thinking that I didn't even know that I had. So it's not enough to have good intentions as educators working with other people, children who will become, the adults that will run our systems, human beings in this world from birth on. But the impact is also important. So you can have good intentions and still do harm. And so it's important for us to have these conversations to shed light on things that we can do to be better as educators. So I remember we went to see a Black male student panel at Michigan State University when you were at the latter part of high school, I believe. If I'm off on the timing, let me know. We were listening to these Black males tell their stories about their experiences in schools, and it was geared for educators and students. And I went as an educator, you all went as students. You were listening to their stories, and they were talking about very similar things that you're actually sharing right now. And you shared that because your father and I that moved into, the suburbs, borderline rural, right? Suburban rural,
Mhm.
and out of the inner city. And we thought we were doing something good. I didn't know what I know now, in terms of the
Mhm.
importance of students being in environments that are created with them in mind. And I feel like you talk clearly that when you were in the inner city school, when you were in Lansing schools, you felt like those schools, because there were more people, more educators who looked like you, that the systems were created more with you in mind. Is that accurate
Mhm.
for me to say?
Mhm.
Okay. And so being in a school district that had, I think when I was there and when you were there, it was about 9% African American. Maybe it was, just at 10%, And so you were saying moving through the school, navigating the system itself, it would have been easier if you had been white. You were just saying you just felt sometimes like if I were white, I could navigate this much easier. And I don't want to, like, number one, put words in your mouth, but as a mother, I remember the conversations that we have, and I remember thinking about what that meant for the decisions that your father and I had made, and how as parents we're trying to make the best decisions. And for me, I'll just be honest, I loved you being in Lansing, but we were driving you past the school every day to go to Lansing, and I was like, we're paying taxes here, but also there was another layer that I had to be honest about at some point, and that was you're going to live in a world that's predominantly white. You're more than likely going to work in a world that's predominantly white. I need you to learn how to navigate white spaces so that you can do it with ease. That was one of my own, like, without realizing it, implicit, maybe somewhat intentional, but wanting to make sure that you understood what it meant to navigate culturally white spaces.
Mm.
But anyway, if you don't remember that, we'll move on. But it just that
And I remember you started off by saying, what did you say? You were like, you said you're not saying that you want it to be white, but when you say that, then that adds a whole extra element to my brain. I was like, when did I want to be white? And that's what I was like, but no, I see what you're saying. Where I was saying if I had white privilege, life would have been a little bit easier. So that makes more sense. When you said I was like, what did I say? I want to be white. I was
you
like, I don't think
never
I ever
said
said that.
that. You never
Yeah,
said that.
okay,
You've
okay,
always
okay.
been proud of your heritage, on
Yeah.
your mom and your dad's side. And I mean, that brings up a whole nother conversation in terms of the richness of your heritage and how when you show up, it's just a brown face, not showing
Mm.
the richness that you bring into that space and the histories that your family, that you have, that you're born into. So, but I'll move on from there. And it just made me feel like that there's a difference between intention. While teachers were intending to do the right thing and very caring, many of them, the impact of not understanding how to center the experiences of African American males within schools can still have a negative impact. Were there spaces in school where you felt like your voice truly mattered? When you shared your thoughts and your ideas, how were you received?
I mean, I think it was pretty well received. I don't think I'm the best example. I think it was pretty chill for the most part. It was pretty chill for the most part, but not for everybody. So I
Okay.
guess that's probably what the drawback is. So I can tell you about my experience, but also know the things I saw that I didn't like. So,
You, oh,
um,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
You were an avid reader and writer. I still share a piece that you wrote, The Smile in the Coffin, that really
Mm,
just a powerful piece. And you had a teacher in high school, I think it was your AP, I don't know if it was writing or English, but when we would have parent teacher conference, he would talk quite a bit about you as a writer and you as a human being. I felt like he was one of the teachers that when I sat down, he didn't focus on your behavior. Because a lot of teachers, when we would sit down, go, he's well
mm.
behaved. And I'm like, well, he better be.
Yeah, I would
Because,
say that's kind of what I was thinking when you first asked. So
yeah,
like if you do speak up, for me at least, it'd be like, oh, you said that so well, you this, you that, but it wasn't really necessarily what I was saying. It was just more the fact that I was able to say it,
yeah,
like. But I remember your teacher you're talking about. I actually really liked him. He was like just one of those people that like you could tell was just passionate about the subject. Not even necessarily teaching. I mean, I'm sure he was, but like he was really passionate about English and reading and literature and writing and stuff like that. So who was teaching didn't matter. Like he was that passionate about it, So
yeah.
I didn't feel too much of like the same biases and things you would feel from other teachers that may be just doing it for a job or doing it because it pays the bills.
Yeah, I appreciate that you really liked him because I did too as a parent. And the
Mm,
reason why is when I sat down with him, when your dad and I sat down with him, he would talk about your humanity, your passion,
mm,
and your capabilities and your potential. And so I never felt like he was in any kind of way like hyper focused on the things that people tend to focus on for black males in schools. Oh, he's well behaved. Oh, he's articulate. Those were common things we heard when we would sit down, but he would not focus on your behavior as an element of surprise or how well you could read or write or talk. He focused
mm,
on you as a human being and the content that you were engaging in as a human being. And I really appreciated
mm.
that. All right, we'll go ahead and there's one more question around voice, and then we'll go to validation, and then we'll wrap up here. What message do you think your school gave you directly or indirectly about whose voice mattered most?
I don't know. I don't want to give you an I don't
Let
know,
me
but
ask you this. Did you feel like your voice mattered?
I didn't feel like it didn't matter. I don't know if that answers your question. I didn't.
Yeah, I'm not digging for anything. I really am interested in what you're really thinking. And I know that as you continue to reflect, you may have things that come up. So feel free to share them and I can always add them, to this podcast somewhere in the notes. But okay, you said,
Yeah, man, I don't feel like it did matter. I don't think they knew how to make it feel like it mattered. I don't know if those are necessarily two different things, but they are. It was just more of an ignorance thing.
yeah,
I didn't have a whole lot of malicious teachers or whatever, teachers that where their bias was
yeah,
extremely outward, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
They had them, but it
yeah,
wasn't like like some people you can tell they're like really internalizing their hate, so it kind of comes off in the way they react to certain things. Like I
yeah.
haven't been experienced that too often.
Okay.
Um,
And I think that's great because I think one of the things I hope that this podcast does is help people think about the things they are doing well and right
mhm.
to do more of that, right? And then the things that need to change them. So, we want to hear about the great things because educators have a very difficult job. And part of the problem is everybody thinks that they can do it because they went to school. And most people have no clue what educators do day in and day out. It is not an easy job, even though it's highly rewarding and very enjoyable when you're interacting with students and with families. Okay, so moving to validation so we can begin to wrap up. What impact did school have on your sense of self?
I mean, it's gonna be a tale of two schools. Before in Lansing or whatever, it didn't. You felt a lot more celebrated and whole. You felt like tolerated in a lot of ways. They were just kind of like whitewashing, trying to, don't wear this, don't do that. Why are you guys so loud? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? It's not stuff that was like negative, aggressive, or like detrimental to anything. Just stuff they weren't used to or didn't understand. So
Okay.
um, it was actually really confusing.
Did you feel any erasure? Did you feel like you had to assimilate? Did that make you feel like you had to be someone else?
Probably subconsciously, maybe subconscious more than anything.
What advice would you give to educators today who truly want to make representation real in schools?
Learn about your students' interests. Start there because even if you have cultural differences, you can find middle ground because there are mutual interests between both. It doesn't. I'm not saying you have to, have the kids like electric sliding or anything, or whatever. But just ask the students questions. Like at the very least, at the very minimum, they'll kind of think you care because I'm pretty sure most kids, not like on either side of the fence, aren't asked questions by adults like in a way that shows that they care. It's just kind of not from like person to person. It's usually from adult to kid or adult to child, adult to teen. But when you ask questions like that and try to like really level with them, it can kind of clear the gap that cultural differences might have. So I think it just ask more questions, but like ask questions that show you care, because then that'll also disarm students. Because the same way that they have biases, we have like a natural guard against it because of how often we're hit by people's biases that we don't even know. Like, you know what I mean? That I wouldn't even understood it until the words came out for it later on or until you learn the words for it. But you just always feel like you're on guard or on feeling awkward and you're not an awkward person. It just doesn't feel right or natural. So I'll just say that ask questions.
As we close, what's one final message you want to leave with our listeners, students, educators, or parents about why representation in schools matter?
What's one last message you'd like to leave with your audience? How about that? What's your message? I've been talking a lot. What's you
Okay, you
Uno
all, let me
reverse.
just tell
Uno
you,
reverse. Look,
this
homie.
son of mine, when he was in kindergarten, first grade, we would drive home from school. He would ask me questions all the way home. So, Mr. Science Experiment, everywhere we go. So, I knew you would do that and turn the script. I would want people to think about everything that you've said today. And I feel like you've provided real
Mm.
strategies that educators could engage in, like getting to know your students, ask questions, be intentional about showing that you care, making sure that the school reflect the experiences that diverse students have. So if I have students coming in who don't look like me, what is it that I need to understand about them and their culture and their lived experiences that I can incorporate in their daily experiences within the school so that they
Mm.
feel like they belong there rightfully rather than having to change who they are and leave their identities at the door. And that's something I will always preach.
Well said, 100%.
All right. Well, hey, I appreciate you. Thank you for being on my show. And I just want to say to those who are listening today that we're going to continue to have this conversation around the 3 V's for representation. And the guests are providing really rich experiences and strategies that are very relevant in your schools today. So take that. And then I'm going to provide some reflection questions that you can leverage based on today's conversation. And you can use those to think about your own experiences, either as a student or as an educator and even as a parent. Finally, I want you to join the Keeping It Real with Dr. Ruthie conversation. So please take a look at the links here for Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can access my newsletter on LinkedIn, where I provide monthly newsletters on issues around education. And then, of course, on my YouTube channel, Dr. Ruthie Speaks Education, focusing on real issues in education and real strategies that get real impact. Thank you for joining us today. And remember, keep it real. Thank you so much for joining Real Talk with Dr. Ruthie Payno-Simmons, Uncensored. I truly appreciate you taking time to listen. In addition to this podcast, I have a company called RPS Educational Impact, where I support school districts, educational entities, and other organizations who want to improve their systems through continuous improvement processes. We enjoy supporting educators at all levels through professional development, coaching, continuous improvement, and implementation supports to create learning environments where all students can thrive. So visit rpsimpact.com to find out more about the technical assistance that we can provide you upon request.
Welcome to Real Talk with Dr. Ruthie Uncensored.
I am Dr. Ruthie Payno-Simmons.
Get honest about the real challenges and possibilities in education and beyond.